We now move over to the New Zealand Taxpayer Union. They're in person.
Good morning. My name is James Ross. I'm the Policy and Public Affairs Manager at the New Zealand Taxpayers Union. This is Deacon, our Economist, and Alex Emes, our Comms Officer. We're a grassroots advocacy organisation representing about 200,000 registered members and supporters. And when I'm chatting to our people, the issue that comes up time and time again, more than almost anything else, is that people just want to see the country moving again. You know, our economy is languishing, our productivity is one of the worst in the developed world, and that is in no small part a result of our frankly broken resource management framework. We wholeheartedly support any efforts to rectify that, but we don't mince our words when we say that wholesale RMA reform needs to be the aim. We appreciate that's not going to happen overnight, so little fixes around the edges, such as what this bill is trying to achieve, we support. The issue there is that although we support the aims of the bill, we don't necessarily think it will achieve those aims in practice. And I'd like to start by noting that although we've not focused too heavily on how this bill will affect primary industries in our submission, that's not to say we don't think they're important. You know, it accounts for 80% of our exports. If we want to see economic growth, we need to see a strong primary industry sector, but we've chosen to focus on those areas where we feel we can add some unique insight. Suspending the hierarchy of obligations from the consenting process is something to be commended. It's a complex system which opens councils up to legal challenges based on concepts which, frankly, are about as fluid as the water they're trying to regulate. But in addition to that, we think that the hierarchy chosen is simply wrong. If you ask the vast majority of Kiwis whether they thought that prioritising the well-being of a body of water over the health needs of their children and their neighbours, I don't think you'd find many that think that the health of their communities should come second, but that's exactly what this NPS is asking communities to implement. We also regret the way in which economics seems to have become something of a dirty word over the last few years. For those Kiwi families who are struggling to put food on the table, those are their economic concerns, and seeing them bottom of the hierarchy is clearly a slap in the face. But the chief problem we see with this bill is that although we support the aim, we don't think in practice it will necessarily achieve that. As we've heard from a few councils already in these oral submissions, although regional councils consider their regional plans in their consenting processes, the obligation to consider this hierarchy in regional plans isn't being removed. So through the back door, this hierarchy of obligations is still going to be considered in the consenting process. So the effects of this bill as written at the moment would be negligible. The hierarchy is only a part of what we see as a problematic piece of public policy, which is Te Mana O Te Wai, which is a fluid and shifting concept based on a series of other fluid and shifting concepts, a number of which have metrics which cannot be scientifically measured. Something as important as a resource management framework, you cannot build an efficient, effective economy with objective decisions based on these subjective views. The government's already signalled that it intends at some point to replace this NPS when it implements its wholesale RMA reform. It realises it's difficult to implement, hence why it's kicked the deadline back to 2027. But with councils already acting to implement as soon as practicable, the effects of that kicking back the deadline are again negligible. The government sees that this is difficult. We'd like to see them go one step further and scrap this NPS entirely. Councils already have requirements and tools to protect well-being of water under the RMA. And we don't think the world is going to fall in on itself if we put some trust in local democracy over the next few years. We allow regional councils to manage their own water resources, and we allow them to decide upon their own prioritisation of needs. Managing issues like freshwater is what regional councils are for, managing these issues that cross district boundaries. So we say, why not let them get on with it? Thank you.
Loan funds.
Thank you for your submission. Are you aware, you talk about the sort of amorphous nature and fluidity of Te Mana o Te Wai. Are you aware that the National Objectives Framework, which directly informs Te Mana o Te Wai, has numerical values that are actually defined by ecosystem health? Yeah. And other sections of the National Policy Statement indicate really clearly about how to establish ecosystem health at a catchment scale?
Sure. So, I mean, there's, as you say, there are some metrics in there which are scientifically measured. Mm-hmm. But if we look at some of the advice that was tendered to the last government, they were receiving advice that was saying even rivers and national parks wouldn't meet some of those metrics. So that is problematic in itself. But as we've seen through the years of back and forth negotiations like we saw in ECAN before consenting could take place. Clearly, there is this degree of subjectivity that can't be decided upon, and it is stalling the consenting process.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Any supplementary on that?
It's a new one.
Yeah, carry on.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So you also mentioned that you think that NPS-FM should be revoked in its entirety, but you're talking about the importance of drinking water and how that should be the absolute primary focus. So how would we achieve better drinking water quality if we revoked all the limits and standards within the NPS-FM?
We have a regulator. There is a very powerful regulator with serious teeth that is biting councils for failing to comply with drinking water standards.
Do you want to elucidate further on, elaborate?
Well, I'm saying water quality for potable water is already governed by a separate entity, which was set up some years ago, basically in response to the Havelock North issues. And my understanding is that regulator is doing its job, doing it very well.
My understanding is using the standards in the NPS-FM and the National Objectives Framework as part of its remit. Are you talking about Taumata Arawai? Is
Yes.
that the regulator you're referring to? Thank you.
No further question? No, any other questions online? There appear to be none. Just very quickly then, just to rehash the hierarchy of obligations, it seems to be where most of the conversation goes to. Do you want to further elaborate where you sit with that? Because I haven't quite understood it. Are you saying the hierarchy of obligations is in of itself as a tool is good, but just not the law of sequential order as it sits? Is that what you're saying? Just if you want to illuminate.
I think our key point there is that it should be up to regional councils to decide for themselves how they prioritise those. But even looking at the hierarchy as laid out at the minute, we feel like the order is completely wrong. Now, it should be up to local councils to decide on their own needs. But from our perspective, the directive from central government at the minute is pointing those councils in entirely the wrong direction.
Okay, so expand on that. What do you think your version of the hierarchy of obligations would look like? What?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think everybody in this room who's come through over the last couple of weeks agrees on the points that we'd like to see clean waters and rivers, we'd like to see health, and we'd like to see a strong economy, but we would prefer to see people prioritised over water. And I noticed in the last submission, it was noted that it was the hierarchy was discussed as though it were the water, then the people, then the economy. I think that's an incorrect framing, and that the health of people and their economic needs are clearly both in relation to people's well-being, and it should be the well-being of people that a government's choosing to prioritise, which I don't think they have been doing under this current NPS.
Fantastic, thank you. If you've got a supplementary very quickly, yes.
Can you conceptually grasp that the health of the environment and the health of people is actually the same thing?
I would argue that the way that the NPS has been implemented by a number of regional councils has been prioritising, frankly, unachievable water quality standards over the health of people. In a world with limited resources, at the end of the day, we can't achieve perfect outcomes on all of these, and it has been health outcomes and economic outcomes in particular which have been suffering.
Thank you.
Can you give an example? Is there any example
Sorry,
there?
can you go through the chair, Rachel?
Yeah.
We are behind time.
I know, it's just very supplementary to that. Just, is there an example of the health of people being in opposition to the health of the water body that the submitter just mentioned?
Well, to use an example that came up in one of the prior submissions with the delays for years in any consenting from ECAN in this field, where negotiations on what the health of the well-being of the water body looked like stalled the consenting process, which stalled economic processes and economic development, and people end up poorer, people end up worse off health-wise.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for your time this morning. Very grateful for your time. We've met time. Thank you so much. Thank you for your submission.